Good morning, everybody. Nice to see some familiar faces, even after a little bit of a hiatus there for the first couple days of the week. We've got Levi, we've got ABD, we've got Netstar, Chris Roberts, Blackface, Jack, Roni, Lance, and Michael. Good to see you guys. Nice to see everyone in the chat. Good morning, good morning. Some people will probably continue to trickle on in as they realize, the stream is back online. Fantastic to see everyone, though. Glad to be back on the stream. Let's get into what we're always doing. Good morning, JVP. Nice to see you as well. So, as always, economic calendar for the week. Obviously, we've gotten through the bulk of the important stuff, which was yesterday, right? The FOMC economic projections, the statement, and most importantly, the Fed funds rate, where we've got exactly what we were expecting, the 0.25 or 25 basis point rate hikes going forward for the remaining 6 meetings in the year of 2022. So we would expect that that's what the market is expecting, and any surprises that differ from this number right here, the market probably will not like. Some more people rolling in. Joey T, Axel, John C, Scott, good morning. Good morning. So Fed funds rate, this is the expectation moving forward. Keep an eye on it. I don't really think Jerome Powell is going to throw any surprises in the mix there, but you never know. You just simply never know. So the question now becomes, now that the market rallied on this information yesterday, can we sustain this rally? And if you watched the video from last night, I'm not firmly confident in the move higher until we form a higher low, right? A higher low. So we'll see. If we form a higher low, yes, maybe this starts to become more of a reversal based on this announcement, based on, the clarity we've provided into the remainder of the year. But until that happens, a little bit skeptical, right? So we'll talk about those charts in just a minute. This morning, we got unemployment claims. This stuff's not really that important. Industrial production and home sales on Friday, not really a big deal. The fireworks for the week were really right here, and it's in the rearview mirror now. So no big deal on our economic calendar. Let's just quickly take a glance at what we have next week, anything major. So this is next week, and you can see it's pretty quiet in the beginning. Monday, Tuesday, nothing. Oil inventories, claims again next Thursday. Durable goods, nothing really too important here. Nothing crazy next week. So I think we're out of the woods in terms of economic calendar stuff in the short-term future. So unless there's a surprise meeting here or there, I don't really think this has a huge impact on our marketplace. Let's continue along and talk about earnings. Who's on the calendar for today? Some more people rolling into the chat. Fantastic to see all you guys. We've got Rise, MT Lover, Roscoe, Philip, Armando. Nice to see you all. So today, I'm kind of glad that we didn't do the stream earlier because there's nothing really crazy going on prior to today. The big ones for today, and they're not even that crazy, are just going to be FedEx, GameStop, and Dollar General reported before the bell this morning. So we'll take a brief look at that chart, but these two are the big guys. GameStop, obviously more of the joke. It's not really something that I would seriously consider to trade, but FedEx, something that I own in the long-term portfolio for sure. It'll be interesting just to see how that one pans out. So those are the two to really be watching after the bell today. Nothing crazy happening on Friday either. We're sort of out of the bulk of the good ones, if you will, for earnings season, but just keep an eye on these two. Let's get on over to the platform and start talking about the ES futures, the good stuff, the meat and potatoes of the presentation. What do we have going on? So let's keep it back to the basics, right? What do we have going on? Let's keep it simple. Question number 1. Are we opening on a true gap up or a true gap down? Answer to that question has to be no. Here's yesterday's high. Here's yesterday's low. We are not opening outside of that range. There's the forecasted opening print. So we are not opening on a true gap, which decreases, of course, the potential for shock and awe. Question number 2, where are we opening in relationship to the overnight range? I would say we're opening in the lower third, much closer to the overnight low, but not dead at the overnight low. So we'll put sort of a 45-degree arrow to the downside, all right? So nothing crazy in the overnight session. It's not like we're dramatically away from the close either, which of course is the first part of question number 3. Where are we, what is the position of the overnight inventory? And you can see if you were to extrapolate the close from yesterday, let's go ahead and draw that in with a white line. There we go. We have some activity above, a little below, back above, and now a little bit more below. So I would start to say we're a little bit net short, but not in a major way. I would say the skew is probably something like 40% net long, 60% net short. So overall, more balanced than imbalanced, right? There's nothing crazy about the overnight session. Also opening in range, opening inside of value, as you guys know. It doesn't really, we shouldn't be expecting a huge shock and awe open, a knee-jerk reaction at the bell. Instead, we should start to look for two-sided back and forth trade, potentially an opening range. And as in if we break that opening range, we look for longs into critical levels overhead or shorts into critical levels down below. Now, one interesting part about this morning's open is the fact that we have a small spike to contend with on the market profile. Okay, so if I were to do something like this, anything that happened here is considered the spike, and I think it's best just to illustrate that over on the market profile. So let's come on and take a look over here now. And by the way, guys, I mentioned this in last night's video, but by now you should definitely be on the M contracts from the H contracts. H is no longer trading nearly as much volume as the M contract, so please roll if you have not done so already. Anyways, on our spike, notice that we are actually slated to be opening underneath the spike. Okay, so that's a little bit more of a bearish outcome in terms of where we could possibly be opening. If we were opening in the spike, that's the highest likelihood that two-sided trade resumes, just because we know that there was not enough time to really resolve these prices. So if we open it inside, we would expect some buying and selling to determine whether or not these are fair, and then a move outside of the spike becomes sort of the next directional element. Now that we're opening below it, again, it's a slightly more bearish indication, but please don't forget that we are opening inside of value. We're fairly close to the point of control. I still do imagine that a fair bit of two-sided trade does return on the opening print, right? There's nothing there's nothing crazy in terms of skew, as we just pointed out, inventory imbalance, nothing of the sorts that would cause a knee-jerk reaction. I don't think anyone's going to wake up and go to their desk today and say, oh God, futures are 50 points higher, I've got to sell it, or futures are 50 points lower, I've got to buy it, right? That's not the case for today's session. So that's what we've got in terms of market profile. That's what we've got in terms of our levels. Lance is asking, when do you roll to the new contract, first of the month on futures? No, it's just whenever the volume flips. So a quick and dirty trick that you can use, Lance, is if you come on over to a watch list on Thinkorswim and just type in /ES and then the old contract, so H22, and then we come in with the new contract right below it and go ES, where's the slash, there we go, and then go M22. Notice here, and this is actually, this is a great example. I mean, look at what we have. So the H22 contract is only trading 100,000 contracts, and the M22 contract has more than double that at 224,000 contracts this morning. So always just go based on volume. I mean, I'm never holding futures contracts overnight, so the roll doesn't really impact holding a position. So whenever I'm day trading, I just want to be where there is the most liquidity, right? And that's going to be on the M contract so far. So I would say that it's a good time to roll now. So that's a quick and easy way to determine that. Just use a watch list function and take a look at volume there. So that's the ES futures. Let's take a look at our SPY daily though, just because I do believe that this helps sort of cement the context for what's going on. Usually we're not looking at the ES daily, but what do we have on the SPY, right? We talked about this in last night's video. Here's your area of balance, right? And you can see as long as we hold any higher low pullbacks above that, there's a higher likelihood that this resistance trend line breaks, and then we move through the 437 and we can continue to the upside. Based on what's happening in the overnight session, based on where we're slated to be opening, I think this morning we'll get some sort of opening range. A good indication will be, is it above this area right here, which is roughly 433.50. If that happens in the SPY, and we can hold this level, put in an opening range, that strikes me as being slightly more bullish just because we're holding up above where a chunk of value and indecision was from yesterday. We would be opening kind of in the SPY, at least, closer to that spike, right? So opening range that happens here strikes me as being more bullish. I would favor breakouts that take us back to the overnight high 437, which is also your critical daily level, right? We've talked about this number a lot in the past. So that would, from the daily perspective, would look something like this. If we just get consolidation on the day, it's a little bit of a doji. That strikes me as bullish hold. Maybe we start to form some sort of bull flag up here and then a break eventually. If we crack the 433.50, obviously we're moving firmly back down into range, and the targets based on our ES futures should start to become value area low. And then obviously anything underneath that, I mean, look at what happened here, right? So there's your support at value area low. That's why it kind of is value area low. If we crack that, there's just this big emotional move to the downside. Yesterday's low is quite far away. So not really, not holding up at this kind of area right around in here, overnight low, this little shelf of resistance from yesterday. Anything that cracks that, maybe it's not the best outcome for our futures, and it just continues our SPY daily downtrend, right? A crack here, move here, and it does not hold 429. We're looking for lower, right? We're looking for lower. Look above and fail. Could be in play. So the title of this stream is, I forget exactly what it is, Markets Digesting the Rate Hike. It's also markets determining the upcoming trend. Are we going to break the resistance trend line and kick off a new leg higher in the markets, or are we going to roll over and just continue this little downtrend that we've been on, right? That's the question that we need to answer on today's session. And it's going to be fairly, I don't want to say obvious, but if you break the resistance trend line, you break, and it's a more bullish indication. We're looking for that stronger reversal now in the SPY. If we remain below, then the odds of the look above and fail are increased, and it's all about 429, right? So it's as simple as that from the more medium-term perspective. From the short-term day trading perspective, we already talked about looking for the opening range and then some sort of breakout or breakdown from it to determine the move early on in the morning, okay? So that's our SPY. Let's talk about a couple of sectors before we jump into the QQQs and the remainder of the market. So the XLF happens to be at the top of the list on today's Market Minder window. What do we have in the XLF? So you can clearly see we're much more firmly inside of this area. Big move to the upside. Obviously, the banks are liking the interest rate hikes. And the critical thing to watch out for here is, does this gap fill or does it hold? And as of right now, I would imagine it holds, just based on what the overnight is doing, getting acceptance towards the midpoint of yesterday's range. We're not opening aggressively lower towards the lows, and we're also not aggressively opening at the highs. I imagine we get a day of digestion here in the financials. Oliver, to answer your question, yes, I am an intraday trader. Very rare that I swing trade. If I do swing trade, usually it's via some sort of short option structure, right? And I'm just working with theta in my favor. So XLF, pretty neutral. I don't think that it's going to be a major drag or boost to your S&P 500 today, just opening so smack in the midpoint of yesterday's range. This move overall, though, is a healthy thing for the S&P 500. And then next up, the heaviest weighted sector of them all, coming in at XLK, tech sector. Same sort of deal as the S&P 500. However, in the pre-market, notice that we're kind of already at/above that resistance trend line. So the number here to watch is 150. Right? We talked about this in last night's video as well. It's the critical level support. Resistance, we're now above that, so anything that pulls back and holds that gets me more confident, more excited about upside reversals here in the XLK, especially noting that we have equal lows, right? We're not coming off of a lower low, which would be a more bearish indication. We're coming off of an equal low, so this could certainly start to become a bit of a double bottom, right? Something that does that, there's your move higher. We're looking at 154.60. So resistance trend line, main focus, higher low pullbacks that stay above 150. Fantastic here in the XLK. Anything that breaks back down underneath, there's possibility that this turns into a look above and fail, and we do make a move back down towards the bottom end of our range. That would be a huge bearish implication for the S&P 500. So before we move along, let's do the poll as we usually do. So here are our scenarios for the day. Drop something in the chat. So here we go. If you think we're going to get opening range and then bullish break back up to the overnight high, drop a 1 in the chat. If you think we're going to go sideways for the day and do something like this, maybe dip down and just play around in value area basically, so from here to here, drop a 2 in the chat. And if you think it's straight lower off the open right back down to yesterday's lows, it was just a massive fake out, you're bearish on the market, drop a 3 in our chat. So what do we think is going on here? What do we think the move will be today? We've got some numbers coming in. We've got some 2s, some 3s. 2s and 3s so far, no 1s. No one's thinking bullish. Gene is thinking 1. He's the first bullish trader in the chat today. Lots of 2s coming in for balance. There's a 1, some more 3s. We've got a 1, then a 3. So another massive fake out. We'll see. Just to give you guys an idea of what I'm thinking about, if the opening range holds up above overnight low and we take out the highs, obviously I'm thinking here, right? That's probably my focus for the open. If that happens, it would be a move out of value again. So some sort of opening balance based on, we know that the inventory is not net long or net short, fairly balanced in the overnight. So let's see if we get that two-sided trade, a break of the opening range to take us higher towards the overnight high. The market liked what it saw yesterday, so we are looking for that upside follow through. We'll get to the Chinese stocks, Alex, as we move throughout the video today. We'll get to those. I think there's some interesting things with BABA JD, NEO. It's on our list down here. Anyways, so opening range and then I think break higher. That's my personal outlook. Obviously, if it's opening range and then we break lower, I'm not going to fight that move to the downside, but I just don't, maybe it turns more into just the ping pong thing. Number 2, I don't really think it's going to be number 3, all out breakdown to yesterday's low. I don't really think that's a likely scenario, but who knows, right? I don't know any better than you guys. We're just watching to see what unfolds based on probable scenarios and where our edge really is, right? Do we have an edge to the upside if we get a pattern? I think so. And personally, I would look to execute on that sort of outcome. So that's what we've got in the ES. Let's move along and talk about the Qqq Nasdaq 100. What do we have going on in here? Obviously very similar to your XLK. However, we've broken more firmly that resistance trend line. Notice that it's coming in from here, so it's a secondary. There's sort of touch 1 on the swing out method. Touch 2 would have been here. We gapped up and then closed below, so we're not going to count that and adjust for it. And now we're clearly above. So good strength in the Qqq now as well. The question here is the back test of this level. You can see that we're already pulling back in the pre-market. Again, just like the SPY, I would love to see any sort of consolidation or opening range this morning that holds 337.25. That to me looks bullish. Any breaks of the highs then should take us here towards the overnight high, yesterday's high, that 340, 342-ish area. Okay, so that's how you would play the Qs on the bull side if we get an opening range and we stay above that 337.25. If we break down underneath, again, I think we get more of that chop phenomenon, the two-sided trade in the value area on our Qqq. Let's quickly go over to the market profile so I can illustrate that. We're going to change this one over to the M contract, so NQM2. There we go. That's what we want in the NQ. Just briefly trying to find the value areas for you guys on the NQ. We'll auto fit that. And here we go. So value area in our NQ, and you'll have to translate this to QQQ. It's not as easy as the SPY, but we've got 13, what's the number? 13,857 down towards value area low is 13,650. All right. That's your NQ value area. Just like in the S&P, you can clear, this one's actually a little bit cleaner. You can see that we are opening right at the base of the spike. Here's that activity that constitutes the spike. All of the overnight session was accepting in the spike. We get a balanced overnight session, not expecting shock and awe. The same deal, right? The same exact deal as what we discussed in the SPY and the ES futures. This one, watch your spike, right? So the top of the spike is value area high. Again, that's 13,865 roughly, 861, 860. This general area where we're trading right now. If we stay above, fantastic. We would look for a move back to the top of the spike, yesterday's high and the pre-market high, as we just discussed in our QQQ, right? That's essentially the exact same thing that we just pointed out here. Opening range, breakout higher, target yesterday's high, and then the overnight high, right? That's the QQQ breaking back down, chop through value area. Next up, we have IWM Russell 2000 and then the small caps. Axel asks, what about quad witching? What's max pain? You look at options for that, and the answer to that is I don't really think that there's too much to do just based on, knowing it's quad witching. Sure, there might be some crazy volatility as options are expiring and the futures are expiring. We have all these expiries. I think that just causes market volatility. I don't necessarily think it's useful to try to predict what max pain will be, where we think we're going. Just focus on the technicals, right? The price action ultimately will drive what's kind of going on. And sure, you could make the argument that people are trying to peg the price, so on and so forth. To me, it's a little bit too speculative. I'd rather just stick to the bread and butter, technical analysis. Carl asks, what software do you use to look up the market profile? That's Tradevate. It's a futures broker online. It's my favorite. It's the one that I use to actually execute all my futures trades, not Thinkorswim. They have the best commissions, the fastest data. To me, it's the best option out there. I'm not affiliated, wish I was, but Tradevate is the name of that platform. Continuing along, IWM, I know I sound like a broken record. 208 is your critical upside pivot. Nothing to really do here until we can get back above that. We are starting to look at this as a bit of a double bottom. We've closed above that neckline at 201. Look for a little bit of follow through to 204 if that happens, and we hold 201 on the back test. You can see here on the 15-minute time frame, just like in everything else, there's that critical pivot point. It's basically 201. The highs from yesterday resistance. We get that spike, and now in the pre-market, we're pulling back and sort of respecting it as support. So as long as 201 holds, opening range, fantastic. Breakouts take us to the overnight high, roughly 202.80, and then monitor for continuation into 204. That wouldn't seem crazy to me to put in a daily bar that would be kind of this range. So that's what we've got there. Donald Lee, you're never late, man. Never late. Never late to the stream. As long as you're here learning something, that's fantastic. So we just covered IWM, we covered the ES, we covered the NQ. You can go back and watch those things if you feel like you want to brush up on the broad market. We're basically looking for an opening range and then some sort of break to get to the overnight high, the spike high. And if we break down, look for a chop through the value area. Apple is up first on the chopping block. What do we have on the docket here inside of Apple? In the pre-market, again, this is going to be a common theme. If this is going to be a reversal, needs to put in a higher low as long as it's above 157. Fantastic, something that looks like this. In the pre-market, what do we have going on? Again, this is a common theme as well. Opening right at the base of the spike, getting pre-market support at the base of the spike. Use 158.25 as your support level. Opening range that happens here. Watch for breaks above. That strikes me as being more bullish. As long as we hold the 158 on the opening range, that strikes me as being bullish as well. If we crack it, that's your chop scenario through the value area, I would imagine. Apple, very simple, right? Use these two pivots, 158.25, bullish above, looking for the overnight high, and the spike high from yesterday. And underneath, chop, we do want to see it hold 157 for a daily higher low. It's something that does this, maybe builds out a bull flag over the course of time. A couple more questions in the chat. We have, can we check Caterpillar? Maybe, we'll see. And then Michelle asks, do you trade smaller time frames like the 1 and 5 minute? Yes, absolutely. Usually using the 2 and 5 minute chart and then the 15-minute chart as a supplement for, just finding these structural points like we just did on Apple, right? So hopefully that's helpful, Michelle. Yes, we use the 2 and 5 minute. 1 minute's a little bit noisy, but there's nothing wrong with it. It's just personal preference. Netflix up next on the chopping block. What do we have here? Getting into the resistance trend line. On this one, it's really all about, can we clear this last set of lower highs at, 362.34, right? In the pre-market, you can see that we are pulling back into range. We don't really have that clear shelf of support like we did in Apple or our Qs or the SPY. There's no major spike here. So patience is probably the move in Netflix. I would imagine that we get some chop. If we can firmly break the resistance trend line on today's session, then just look for the pre-market high and that 362. Again, that might look something like this based on where we're opening. And then anything above that, that's where the range really opens up from 362.34 up to 376.80. All right. So that's what we have to the upside in Netflix if the resistance trend line breaks. If it doesn't and we just get consolidation here, to me, Netflix, it's been showing relative weakness. We're coming off of a lower low instead of the equal low like we saw in the SPY and the QQQ, which is fairly concerning, right? So this could easily produce a lower high. We can afford that and still remain in a downtrend, unlike what we had in the broad market, right? So Netflix, be skeptical of this one on long trades. To the downside, it's all about this on a crack of our, I would start to call it this here, 351. So 340.65, yesterday's low starts to become the target. I would just kind of stay away from Netflix, to be quite honest with you. We'll talk about FedEx as we get through earnings. Don't worry, guys. We'll get to it. What do we have in Tesla? What's going on in Tesla? So you can clearly see resistance trendline continuously producing lower highs, and we're underneath it still in the pre-market. So nothing major has changed here. We're underneath yesterday's high. There was no major spike. You can see resistance and resistance yesterday as well, closing up at the highs. Let's just take a quick Fibonacci reading on yesterday's move and start to use that. All right, so from the low up to the high, your 38.2 is going to be right here around 827. Anything that remains above starts to become bull consolidation on the daily or, the larger time frames. Looking at like a 4-hour chart or something, that's great. And then we would look for follow through up and over the resistance trend line. But it's not an easy trade in Tesla, right? It's not an easy trade. And the reason being is if we grab, let's go out to like a 20-day 30. There we go. Remember this level. Remember the 5th of November from your history class. The equivalent of that in Tesla is this level, right? Remember the 850 Tesla. There we go. 850, 855, 854, that general area in Tesla, big deal. So even if we crack yesterday's high on a bullish hold of the 38.2 that we just found, I mean, you're trading for 854. Sure, that's a good intraday scalp, right? Don't get me wrong. That's enough ranges to pick up here on an options contract that's, close to expiration. But for you longer term swing traders, I wouldn't really be overly convicted in Tesla until we can break the resistance trend line and break 850, the pivot here, 854, and then firmly put in some sort of higher low on the daily time frame for a stronger reversal. The one really solid thing that Tesla has going for it is the fact that it clearly has the higher low already. So we'll see if we can crack this area, right? It's all about this pivot here inside of Tesla. So Tesla doesn't really strike me as being an obvious day trade, to be quite frank with you. Right? So bullish consolidation maybe, and then a break of yesterday's high gets interesting. But even still, this one doesn't strike me as being the obvious trade on the open. All right. So unfortunate, but Tesla's not always going to be the good trade every single morning, right? AMD is up next. What do we have in AMD? The new kid on the block, clearly breaking out of the daily balance. What's going on in the pre-market session? Let's actually drop this back down to a more reasonable time frame. We'll grab 5 days on the 15-minute, just so we're not, pulling at straws for data here. So what do we have on AMD? Clearly opening much lower inside of yesterday's range, not even close to the high or the shelf here like we saw in Apple. That's obviously a more bearish indication. I would expect, much more two-sided choppy trade in AMD, opening so middled in yesterday's range. The clear area that we need to see hold if we're going to make upward progress in AMD is 112, right? 112. As long as this forms a higher low pullback on the daily, it's respecting the top end of this prior balance, the lows that were respected in here, fine. This could be the start of a reversal, but as of right now, AMD is probably not the focus on the open either, just like Tesla, not seeing it. Yep. So yeah, guys, we'll get to HD. I know it's probably hard to see on your screen, but this is always the lineup for what we're going to be doing on the day. I know it's probably small. It might even be a little bit grainy, but we will be looking at FedEx. Not FedEx. We'll be looking at Home Depot, Oil, Alibaba, XPEV, NEO as well. All those Chinese stocks that are kind of rallying off the news. We'll get to it. Okay, so let's finish up our core list of companies. Then we'll get into those more interesting nuanced plays. What do we have on Facebook? Right, Facebook, clear break of the resistance trend line. I mean, no doubt about it. This one is way above, breaking back into this area of balance as well. So that's fantastic. I mean, that's obviously a huge sign of relative strength. What do we have going on in the pre-market? Notice that we're clearly, if we let's grab our other tool. Here we go, well above the base of the spike and the top of resistance from in here. A little bit of hang up before that move higher into the close. So all things considered, Facebook, great relative strength on this morning's open. I would say even a break of this pre-market resistance trend line starts to become bullish for something that does this. Boom, right up to the overnight high, 205, right? So anything that holds on to 201 quarter, look for any, bullish excuse. Could be a ascending triangle that forms after the morning open, right? Something that does this, break, there's your overnight high. Facebook looking great from a relative strength perspective. Also the daily breaking that resistance trend line. We're closed inside of this prior range right here. Fantastic, right? Fantastic. So Facebook watch for longs, a breakdown of 201 quarter that doesn't really, excite me for shorts. It would just be chop, right? Chop inside of that value area, which is likely somewhere in here down to around 198.65, all right? So that's what we've got there in Facebook. Next up, Nvidia. What do we have in Nvidia? Breaking the daily resistance trend line. Again, another big deal here. Good relative strength outside of this balance and also outside of this balance based on the close, but obviously we're falling back down into it. It's not the end of the world. There are some pretty bullish things going on here from the daily perspective, so we're not going to write it off just yet. However, unlike Facebook, unlike Apple, notice that we are firmly underneath the highs. We didn't get that afternoon spike. We're not trading above that right now. So patience inside of Nvidia, just like what we saw in AMD. This is, I don't want to say this one's fairly middled, but it's getting closer to being middled as opposed to more bullish or bearish on Nvidia. Okay, so patience on the open here on this one. I'm not really seeing the obvious opening trade, maybe some sort of range break. There's your opening range, up and over the highs, down and out under the lows. That's pretty self-explanatory, but nothing about this would suggest a knee-jerk reaction at the bell. All right, so Nvidia, that's that one. Microsoft up next. Good relative strength on this one as well. So this is more similar to your Facebook, right? Breaking out of the daily balance here. However, still under the resistance trend line. So there's your difference between this one and Facebook. We're still underneath that 300 pivot as well. But if we zoom in on the 15-minute intraday, look at the hold once again of the prior highs of the spike into the afternoon, pulling back, perfectly respecting it once, twice in the pre-market. Your level is 292, right? As long as we put in a range above 292, look for any bullish excuse to get back to yesterday's high and the overnight high, going to be 294.50 and 296 respectively on the upside trades. And to the downside, anything that does this and breaks back down, you know the deal, looking for chop inside of this range, not getting overly bearish until we break back down into the prior day, or excuse me, not the prior day's range, but the balance range from in here. That puts into play the look above and fail, correct? So be aware of that in Microsoft, but as of right now, anything that holds 292, fantastic. Look for any reasons to get bullish into yesterday's high and the pre-market high. All right, next up and lastly, we have Amazon. There we go, Amazon. Last but not least, the beast, as we say, right? So on this one, really choppy. To be quite honest with you, this is not something that I would focus on trading right now just because of its location. Look at this pivot, right? The 3100, we've known about that. We've closed above the resistance trend line. That's a slightly more bullish indication. Overall, the position of this on a weekly time frame chart is really the concerning piece. And I know we've brought it up a number of times here, but look at this range, the balance range, this backtest area at 31.76. I'm not really confident in Amazon longs until we can poke back up into that range. Obviously, with the split news, people are leaning on the bull side here. So we'll see if we can get follow through, but it's all like, if we could just go back down to the daily, it's going to stem from resolving that 3100 pivot that we just discussed. And because we're opening slightly below it, we're pulling back into yesterday's range. To me, if it does make the move higher, that's your first target. I wouldn't really push your luck too much higher than that. If we take a look at the 15-minute intraday, great strength on this one though. So we are opening well above the base of the spike, which is basically here. Not to say the word based too many times. But you get the gist, 30-20, as long as we're above that, yeah, I suppose you could watch for bull flag consolidation above, whoa, that's a phone notification, above the daily time frame level here, above the daily resistance trend line, and boom, then trade it into that 3100 on a breakout of some sort of pattern. That's fine. But as of right now, for the medium-term trend analysis, right, not really overly confident in the break of this resistance trend line until we can clear at least the pivot and then get acceptance above 31.76, right? Anything that's below that just strikes me as just still weekly consolidation underneath the prior balance area. So that is our core list of companies. We're coming up on 9:25, about 5 minutes to go in the stream before the bell rings. What do we have on the docket for extracurriculars, if you will? So BABA, let's get it back on the screen. I know we removed it, but it's time to get it back. It was short-lived. Anyways, what do we have going on here? Certainly, as the Chinese government comes out and says we'll be supporting the stock market, Alibaba, one of the strongest companies over there, big move to the upside, right? So we've recaptured 100. We've negated all this activity down here. I believe that this is called abandoned baby reversal pattern. People come up with all sorts of crazy names. Regardless, we're not above 110. And until we can recapture 110, Alibaba's bearish. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Sure, this is a nice impulsive rally to the upside, but think about all of these people here as overhead supply. This is like the final boss in a video game, right? All of these people are thinking, geez, this thing moved a full, 110 down to 74. So $35 to the downside against me. I don't want to sit through this pain anymore. If they start to take trades off at break even, you're just going to get continued selling pressure here, right? Continued selling pressure. So until we can recapture 110, put in a higher low, and then do something like this, Alibaba is not bullish, all right? It's just simply not bullish. In the short term, sure, could be bullish in terms of momentum, but in the long term, nothing's really changed here from a trend perspective. So what I would watch in Alibaba is, can we hold above 99? Can we hold above 100? Psychological number as well. As long as we're above this, boom, maybe there's some sort of short-term reversal here back to high of day and then watch 110. If that doesn't happen and we crack that, look at the thin structure below us. You don't want to be long as we're aggressively moving through that, right? That doesn't make sense. I'm not saying it's short either, right? I'm not saying it's short either. But I am saying be skeptical of longs. That's basically what I'm getting at. So that's Alibaba. We'll briefly take a look at KWEB, KWEB. This is the ETF for all the Chinese internet companies, I believe. Alibaba obviously being a big component of that. The chart looks the same. There's your overhead supply. Use 33 as the number. We could come in, we could backtest and roll back over, continue our daily downtrend, right? Think of this as the equivalent. There's your final boss stage or whatever you want to compare it to, right? So underneath, the targets would be the low of day, obviously, and then the big gap underneath to start to trade for. So that's anything underneath in terms of this index, at least 2660s down towards 23. All right. And if you don't want to watch the individual companies, just watch KWEB. Right? Just watch this as an ETF. Quickly take a look at NIO, NIO, because that's in the same camp as well. It's obviously not an internet company, but it's a Chinese EV company nonetheless. Taking back some of this move to the downside. But nothing really crazy happening in terms of a setup to be watching for. Nothing about this chart strikes me as clearly obvious to the long side, right? If you are intent on watching it, make sure we hold up at 18. If we hold up there, look for any excuse to be bullish. And just like everything else, rotate to the overnight high, yesterday's spike high, which is roughly 1925 in NIO. 2 minutes until the bell. Let's quickly take a look at HD. What do we have in Home Depot? This is a trade idea from last night's midweek update video. So double bottom potential, there's your neckline. If it breaks, look for the gap to fill overhead. If it pulls back, as long as we're above the support trend line, things remain bullish. Watch for the breakout over time. A breakdown of the support trend line obviously becomes more bearish, and you look for rollover, all right? Let's quickly take a look at XOM for oil as well, just as a proxy for that. In oil, we're opening up towards the top of the overall balance, right? We talked about this in last night's video as well. We just have 2 days worth of sideways action. If we crack the highs, look for the gap to fill overhead. If we crack the lows, look for this pivot low in here, around 74, right? Currently slated to be opening right towards the top, so maybe lean on longs up and over 79 if we can hold like the midpoint of the range, or even the overnight low, right? Something right here, that any hold of 78, bullish consolidation, breakout up above the range to fill the gap overhead. That's a possibility. About a minute to go until the bell. Let's quickly take a look at our futures. Not much has changed, so I'll just give you a quick recap. My anticipated reaction on the open is two-sided trade resumes. We put in an opening range. We crack the highs and either go up towards the overnight high or a breakdown of the overnight low, which is really more obvious in the SPY itself. We just take a look at that here. A breakdown of the overnight low, which is also the prior day's little shelf of resistance, takes us back down towards 429. Could be value area low first, 430. As long as we hold up, though, in the grand scheme of things, so medium-term trend, as long as we hold up above 429, that's a higher low on the daily from here to here, and we can remain bullish on the markets. If we crack 429, we know that's a look above and fail. That's a really bearish outcome. Target 417.50. All right, in the short term, again, just to recap before you guys sign out, look for consolidation, breaks to the overnight high. That's my primary focus on the open. Anything that moves into yesterday's range, I think it's going to be fairly choppy. All right. On your way out, do me a favor, hit the thumbs up button. Really appreciate all you guys tuning in. John C., Donald Lee, JT, Jonathan, nice to see you. Mariah, we've got Jack, Saved by the Bell. Nice to see you guys. And I'll see you in the Discord. If you're not in there already, check out this link right here, and I'll see you in the next one.